When I said I'd empty their trophy lake, they called me insane. The HOA president laughed that day, leaning on her spotless Tesla, smug in front of her multi-million-dollar retreat. "You'll never touch us," she said. "We have attorneys, on retainer, money to spare, and authority stamped in ink." 3 months later, their dreamscape had turned into a sunken wasteland. The so-called jewel of Thornhill Lake, the one they believed untouchable, lay cracked and drained. Their boats sat marooned at odd angles like toys a spoiled child had left scattered in the dirt. My footsteps over that dried basin echoed louder than their arrogance ever had. That woman thought she could erase history with a bylaw. She saw only a stone and plank bridge, dismissed as obsolete. What she didn't see was a family monument. Built in the late Depression by my grandfather's bare hands, it carried 3 generations across water and held 3 proposals, mine and Sarah's included. That bridge was all I had left of her after cancer claimed her. Every sunrise I walked it, and every plank carried echoes of her laugh. So, when some transplanted mogul from Connecticut rolled in, trying to polish our lake into a lifestyle magazine, spread, and picked my bridge as the blemish. She didn't know who she just challenged, because what she never checked was the paperwork that came with my inheritance. She saw only a cabin. What I truly held was the dam that made her lake. Thornhill Lake was a patchwork of stories. Families like mine had cabins weathered for decades, and neighbors like Walt, a Purple Heart vet who fixed outboard engines more often than he fixed his own breakfast, kept the spirit alive. Eleanor grew vegetables for everyone, freely giving, away jars of preserves that tasted like summers past. We respected the shore, kept to ourselves, and knew that water was more than just a backdrop for photos. But then came the luxury invasion, steel and glass fortresses sprouting where cedar cabins once stood. The loudest arrival? Ms. Vivian Blackwood, recently divorced, freshly armed with a real estate law degree, and enough entitlement to fill 3 swimming pools. Her mansion looked more like a museum dropped from orbit, stone columns, imported marble, and windows so big the lake served only as her vanity mirror. The rest of us couldn't decide whether it resembled a corporate headquarters or a Bond villain's lair. Our first meeting was at Henderson's Country Market. She was in line ahead of me, lecturing the cashier about paint shades and property values. Her Tesla glistened outside like a spaceship that crash-landed in 1950. She turned to me, crisp voice dipped in sugar that couldn't hide the vinegar. "You must be one of our charming locals," she said, as if the word charming was a medical condition. 6 months later, her beautification campaign rolled out like a military op. It targeted what she called blights: Walt's base boat, unsightly garbage; Eleanor's vegetable patch, non-compliant agriculture; my grandfather's bridge, unsafe, unattractive, and entirely incompatible with her curated luxury vision. The notice she sent me looked like a summons: bold fonts, jargon, deadlines. So I walked straight to her marble fortress carrying proof, original building permits and surveys that smelled of 1943 dust. I laid them across her Italian countertop, like poker chips. "This bridge existed before you or your homeowner's papers. It's historical, legal, and permanent," I told her. Vivian smiled the way sharks smile before they bite. "Democracy," she cooed, "always favors progress. You have 30 days to comply." That was the moment I realized this wasn't a dispute, it was war. At the next HOA ambush, held in her glass living room under chandeliers brighter than the truth, she packed the board with her hand-picked allies. 6 households who'd bought into her development, all driving cars worth my pension twice over. She unveiled a 3-page structural safety report written by, wait for it, her brother-in-law's consulting firm from out of state. Filled with technical gibberish and grainy photos, it painted my grandfather's stonework as a hazard ready to collapse at any whisper of wind. I'd read engineering reports in combat zones. I knew the difference between professional analysis and hot garbage dressed up in letterhead. "Fraudulent," I said in front of her allies. "Your so-called inspector never stepped foot on my land. That bridge has survived more winters than your marble counters have fingerprints." The vote, of course, was already rigged. 7 against 3. Demolition approved. fines stacked like sandbags against me. But here's where they fumbled. They underestimated how thorough a military engineer can be in the archives. While they toasted their victory, I was neck deep in county files dating back before disco. And that's where the blueprint of my counterattack emerged. The courthouse files had the smell of mold and forgotten battles. Pages yellowed, corners curled, ink fading like ghosts. But in those stacks of paper sat my ammunition. Buried in a 1940s survey, clear as daylight, my grandfather's bridge sat right on a county easement, public right-of-way carved decades before Thornhill Estates ever existed, which meant the HOA had about as much jurisdiction over it as they did the moon. Even better, tucked into HOA bylaws themselves was a clause exempting historic structures. 70-year-old bridge, documented, protected, slated to outlast their imported furniture. It wasn't just a defense, it was a hammer, forged and waiting. So, at Vivian's next cushy board meeting, same glass palace, same smell of overpriced coffee, I didn't stroll in alone. Beside me came Patricia Santos, county clerk, sharp as a bayonet and twice as unyielding. We dropped the county maps across Vivian's glossy table with the kind of finality usually reserved for court orders. Patricia didn't waste time. "This bridge," she announced, tapping the survey with nails like steel, "falls on county easement and predates the HOA. Any vote regarding removal is void. End of story." The room collapsed into silence so heavily it squeezed the air from Vivian's smug grin. She went through facial shades like a malfunctioning traffic light. "That's impossible," she hissed. "Your research," Patricia said, calm as stone, "was incomplete. County law overrides your covenants. The bridge stays." And at that moment, I knew I'd won round one. Vivian's empire cracked, but I also knew hornets sting worst after their nest gets kicked. Her counterattack didn't arrive with brass bands. It came with whispers, citations, and paper cuts. She switched from direct fire to guerrilla tactics, and suddenly my every routine was evidence of a crime. My 5:30 a.m. outboard motor, noise complaint, tackle box on the dock, unsightly clutter, grass height, half an inch over maximum, a decree punishable by fines. Each Tuesday, her hired henchman, clipboard man Craig Nipple, would strut down, my drive with a tape measure dangling like a badge. He clicked his pen like a metronome of misery, scribbling infractions even he didn't believe in. 3-inch maximum grass? Mine stood 3.22. Call it the crime of the century. Dock maintenance unacceptable. Boat cover unapproved shade. $200 here, $50 daily penalties there. Death by petty paperwork. And then there was the whispering. Like a fog, it seeped everywhere. At the general store, the post office, gas station, a turn of heads, a sentence cut off when I walked in. They started calling me the unstable vet, the paranoid neighbor, the angry relic holding the community hostage. Vivian played her role of concerned leader with Oscar-worthy dramatics, just worried about Garrett's state of mind. Truth, be told, that cut deeper than fines. Combat hadn't broken me. Cancer hadn't broken me. But watching neighbors I once waved to avert their eyes like I was contagious, that stung worse than shrapnel. But then, reinforcement. Walt found me. One evening on my dock, beer in hand, sky-painted bronze with sunset. He lowered his battered frame into the spare chair and muttered, "This reminds me of Saigon, bureaucrats in pressed uniforms making life hell for those who just work." Turns out I wasn't the only target. Eleanor's beloved garden labeled agricultural violation. Murphy's work truck, outlawed on his own driveway. Walt's baseboat, scorned as visual pollution. Vivian was running a play straight out of counterinsurgency manuals. Selective enforcement. Pick off the old guard one by one until the rest bowed in fear. What she didn't plan for was that I remembered those same manuals, and I remembered how to flip them back. One clue came from a gray Honda Civic, suspiciously parked near my property at every hour, morning, dusk, night. Same guy, cigarette smoke curling from the cracked window. When I finally stepped up to confront, he fumbled out a PI license. "Contracted by the HOA," he said, voice oily with guilt. "Just documenting risks that could impact community standards." Translation? Paid snoop. Camera always pointed at me, at my bridge, at my grief. That was the moment I wired new security cams and floodlights. Call it paranoia if you want. I call it experience. And not 3 days later, the cameras paid off. At 2 a.m., my dock's posts were sawed halfway through. The footage caught a figure, slim build, pacing and deliberate. Steps, dressed in white as though invisibility could be purchased at a boutique. Walt reviewed the video with me, morning coffee trembling in his scarred hands. After 30 years military police, his verdict was decisive. That woman's guilty as sin. She hadn't just declared war, she'd escalated to sabotage. My instincts told me sabotage wasn't her final card, and I was right. 2 weeks later, a sheriff's cruiser nosed into my driveway while I was repairing the dock posts, camera still rolling from the previous attack. Behind the deputy's car, glided Vivian's white Tesla like a vulture shadowing an ambulance. Out stepped Deputy Maria Santos, steady as a granite ledge. Vivian followed with a trembling voice and an already damp tissue plucked theatrically from her purse. "We're worried," she began, her tone syrupy. "Mr. Donovan has been unstable. Rambling, isolating, talking about conspiracies. He's a decorated veteran, but what if his condition makes him dangerous?" Her crocodile tears fell as smoothly as her designer perfume. 20 years of soldiering taught me calm. I wiped my hands, squared my posture, and approached the deputy with the discipline of a field report. "Morning, officer. I assume this is about Ms. Blackwood's harassment campaign." Then I produced my weapon. A folder thicker than a field manual, tabs color-coded, evidence neatly filed in chronological order. Every violation notices. Every petty fine, screenshots of whisper campaigns, security footage of sabotage printed and indexed, even timestamps of that white linen prowling on my dock at 2 a.m. Deputy Santos flipped through the evidence, expression shifting from neutrality to grim respect. When Vivian piped up again, Santos cut her down with a single sentence. "Ma'am, filing false reports is a misdemeanor. From what I see here, Mr. Donovan's record is thorough and credible. If anything, it's you I should be cautioning." For one fleeting moment, the mask slipped. I saw not a concerned neighbor, but the predator underneath. She recovered quickly with wounded dignity, but the performance had cracked. Her next move was sharper. Certified mail arrived 3 days later, weighted envelope thick enough to choke a mailbox. Inside, $18,000 worth of accumulated fines for imagined violations, compounding with interest. Failure to pay within 60 days would trigger foreclosure action on my grandfather's cabin. Her weapon wasn't just to break my spirit anymore, it was to erase my family entirely with an ink stroke. So, I did what military training had always taught. When outmaneuvered, dig deeper into terrain intelligence. Weeks of research swallowed me whole. County halls, state records, archives that hadn't seen light since the Carter administration. And what I uncovered made my pulse slow to steady thunder. Thornhill Lake wasn't natural, it was created, born of a dam project in the early 1950s. Ownership shifted hands after bankruptcy, debts shuffled, assets sold, and at the end of that chain, the deed didn't land with the county. It fell into my grandfather's estate trust, which meant when he left me that cabin, he also left me the dam. Not symbolic, not partial. I owned steel, concrete, spillways, and gates. Do you see it? All of Vivian's glass castles, her investment. Resort, her empire of water, all of it sat at the mercy of one set of floodgates that belonged to me. Water law isn't barbecue table conversation, but I knew enough from engineering days to get the point. Man-made lakes don't carry natural guarantees of water permanence. The dam owner controls levels, for inspections, for safety, for habitat regulation. I consulted Rebecca Sterling, water rights attorney with a spine of iron and an office that smelled like worn leather and closed cases. She smoothed her glasses and said, "Mr. Donovan, you hold what's called superior water rights. You do not share them. You own them. You could lower that reservoir tomorrow, and no court could legally halt it, so long as you do so under environmental compliance." Her next words lit the fuse. "And given that inspections are overdue by nearly 20 years, you'd not just be allowed, you'd be required to drain it for maintenance." And the dam wasn't just leverage. It was a weapon wrapped in law, bulletproof. From then on, every night at my cabin became a war room. Legal precedents sprawled across the table, engineering manuals open beside them. The outcome was inescapable. Environmental regs required dewatering every quarter century. Our lake? Last inspected in the late 90s, we were nearly 2 decades past due, meaning I could exercise my rights as dam owner, drain the lake partially or fully, and the state environmental agency would applaud me for it. Now picture Vivian's side, her resort loans written with strict premier lakefront clauses. If the lake drained, those covenants collapsed, her creditors called, and her empire toppled like dominoes. All her wealth balanced on one fragile assumption, that water would always fill in front of her resort. She had spent months trying to drown me in citations. But the truth was, I had my hand on the valve, and all her fortunes swam in the basin I could turn to dust. For weeks I studied the spillway schematics like they were scripture. The dam held precise power. I could lower the level strategically, just enough to strand her resort and the glittering new McMansions while leaving old-time cabins like Walt's and Eleanor's with shoreline intact. Surgical, devastating, and justified under environmental stewardship. That's when sleep finally found me again. Not from peace, but from knowing justice had a lever. A lever only I could pull. Once I realized the dam was my lever of justice, the next step was assembling the right squad. Every war needs soldiers. But around Thornhill Lake, my army wasn't formal, just old neighbors with iron wills. First was Walt Henderson, my Vietnamese. Vet brother-in-arms, who had eyes sharper than any camera. His 30 years in military police made him our human radar for lies and ambushes. Eleanor, retired teacher, baker of the world's best oatmeal cookies, became our communications front. That woman handled ornery school boards for decades. Turning HOA nastiness into neighborly support was child's play. Murphy, our contractor, had hands built for concrete and waterworks. He understood the guts of dams better than consultants in polished shoes. And for official cover, Marcus Anderson, county environmental inspector, veteran like me. Back in Kandahar, I pulled him out of a collapsed bridge. He never forgot the debt. Now he'd repay it with a badge, backing our plan in black and white. Our strategy sessions filled my cabin dining table. Rain lashed the windows while schematics, manuals, and thick legal binders sprawled under lamplight. I traced the diagrams with my finger, voice steady. Auxiliary spillway here. We'll drop the southern basin by 8 to 10 feet. That strands. Vivian's resort and every new mansion. Meanwhile, the northern shore, our side, retains manageable water for docks and fishing. Eyes around the table glimmered. It wasn't revenge. It was surgical enforcement. Rebecca Sterling, my attorney, tossed legal forms like playing cards, environmental impact notices, inspection requirements, maintenance permits. She told us, once the paperwork is filed, no one, not even the governor, can halt a state-mandated dewatering. You won't just be legal, you'll be untouchable. Eleanor added the sugar to our steel. We'll frame it as environmental stewardship, fish habitat, algae bloom reduction, water clarity restoration. We tell the truth. This improves the lake's future. Villainous won't know how to spin that against us. Out of coffee mugs, we toasted our mission. Call it country strategy, stitched together from truth, law, and determination. And for the first time since Sarah's death, purpose filled my chest again. But I wasn't foolish enough to think Vivian would go quietly. News of my courthouse digging must have reached her spies, because one night, her desperation turned reckless. 30 a.m. on a moonless Thursday, 3 trucks rolled in at the dam access gate. Walt's night vision cameras caught them crawling, in with torches, hydraulics, and bolt cutters. The plan was simple: disable the spillway controls permanently, erase my weapon before I could use it. They hadn't planned for night ops surveillance that would have impressed the Pentagon. At 2:45, Walt's voice crackled through my radio. Movement confirmed. 3 tangos at the spillway. We stepped from the shadows as Rex Hardwick, a 2-bit contractor notorious for cutting corners, sparked a blowtorch inches from the control housing. Their headlamps froze in our floodlights like raccoons caught red-handed. "We're hired for maintenance," Rex stammered, sweat slicking his forehead. I kept my voice low, cold. "Maintenance doesn't happen at 2 in the morning with cutting." "Torches." Walt filmed every second as evidence stacked thicker than their excuses. When pressed, Rex caved fast. 10 grand cash promised by Vivian herself and schematics she'd personally supplied. Proof not just of sabotage, but organized conspiracy. By the next morning, charges were filed for trespass, property damage, and attempted destruction of water infrastructure. The sheriff's office took it dead serious. Messing with a dam doesn't just risk homes, it risks lives downstream. Vivian's fingerprints were all over it, though she tried to wriggle out. But the more she schemed, the more she exposed the desperation of her empire. We'd caught her red-handed switching from boardroom tyranny to criminal sabotage. Her mask of sophistication cracked under the weight of evidence she couldn't erase. Her empire, already fragile, was beginning to sink. And yet she wasn't done. A trying too hard queen fights hardest when the crown starts tilting. Vivian knew she'd been caught red-handed with batteries and blowtorches, but like any cornered operator, she pivoted. Her new attack front? Character assassination. Suddenly, my military service record was her weapon. Somehow, through her deep-pocketed ex-husband's channels, she pulled my file, a mention of mild post-combat stress. Overnight, whispers morphed into accusations. Garrett's unstable, Garrett's dangerous, Garrett's unpredictable. Online groups lit up with posts about the uncooperative veteran jeopardizing community safety. She wasn't just trying to demolish my bridge anymore. She was angling to discredit who I was. The smear campaign crescendoed at Murphy's Country Store on a Tuesday. I was picking up nails and jerky when she cornered me between fishing lures and soda coolers, envelope in hand. $50,000 cash, she offered, voice smooth, like she'd done this countless times. To end this feud. Everyone has a price, Mr. Donovan. I tapped my phone's record button, then I gave her my answer, steady as a bridgestone. Some things aren't for sale, least of all integrity. Keep your money, you'll need it for bail. For once, she had no immediate script, and the look on her face, when the red light on my recorder blinked back at her, was worth every sleepless night she'd caused. Her next tactic: politics. Phone calls to county commissioners, arm-twisting with state officials, sobbing letters to regulators. Problem for her? Regulations aren't swayed by crocodile tears. If anything, bureaucrats clamp down tighter when pushed. And Marcus Anderson made sure every environmental filing was by the book: maintenance permits, inspection notifications, impact assessments, stamped, sealed, untouchable. Once you set the wheels of bureaucracy moving, no private hand can jam them. It was official now. Lake Thornhill would face a mandatory drawdown for compliance. Vivian couldn't stop it unless she wanted to argue against environmental law itself. Meanwhile, Eleanor organized coffee groups and storytelling circles, reframing the narrative for locals. "This isn't revenge," she told them. "This is stewardship. Fish will spawn cleaner. Water clarity will return. Kids will swim with confidence again." And neighbors, weary from her whisper campaigns, began to swap sides. Walt's intelligence gathering confirmed it. We had sympathy growing. Support, even from some surprising corners. But sympathy wasn't enough. Vivian still had money, investors, and a timeline. Memorial Day. She'd plastered papers with advertisements of a grand lakeside resort opening, the show that was meant to crown her empire. If the lake drained that same weekend, her fortunes wouldn't just shrink, they'd detonate publicly. In war, timing isn't everything, it's the only thing. And this timing couldn't have been sharper. Exactly 6 weeks before Memorial Day, Rebecca spread the final paperwork across her downtown desk. "File these," she said, "and the machinery begins. 30 days of public notice, 60 days max. When the calendar strikes Memorial Day, the gates must open. No judge will cross environmental compliance." So, I signed. My hand didn't even shake. With that ink, it became inevitable. The water would fall, her empire would collapse, and justice, slow dripping for months, would roar forward like the spillway itself. Vivian wasn't about to accept defeat quietly. She unleashed her last weapon: lawyers who billed more in an hour than most of us earned in a week. A Manhattan environmental law firm parachuted into our sleepy county courthouse, armed with binders the thickness of encyclopedias. They filed an emergency injunction, screaming doom. Draining the lake would be ecological vandalism, community devastation, irreversible harm. It read like a novel written by desperation. The hearing landed on a gray Tuesday courthouse wood, paneling glowing under tired fluorescence. Judge Kellerman presided, sharp-eyed, straight-backed, a woman who had seen every HOA squabble and land fight imaginable. Vivian sat immaculate at counsel's table, pearls gleaming, posture perfect. Behind her loomed the city firm, pinstripes stiff as soldiers. My side? Just me, Rebecca Sterling, and an arsenal of facts. Permits, environmental data, historical, precedents. Everything filed in triplicate, documented like an engineering blueprint. Vivian's attorney stood, voice swelling with polished outrage. "Your Honor, this drainage is nothing short of sabotage, an unstable veteran exacting personal revenge on a community asset. The damage to local businesses would be catastrophic." Judge Kellerman didn't even blink. She shuffled through our filings, eyes scanning every page. Then her gavel came down harder than thunder. "Counselor, the dam owner is in verified legal compliance. State Environmental Agency mandates maintenance. Court will not obstruct lawful stewardship, particularly when overdue. Motion denied, with costs awarded to the defendant." Translation: Vivian pays 40 grand in legal fees and we proceed undisputed. The Manhattan lawyers packed up with the efficiency of losers still billing by the hour. Vivian's knuckles blanched white where her grip locked on a silk handbag. It hit her right there. Her last legal bullet misfired. From now on, it wasn't a battle of courts. It was countdown to impact. But desperation doesn't retire easy. Outflowed anonymous hotline tips, EPA complaints claiming I stored toxins, Department of Wildlife calls about illegal nets, even Homeland Security whispers of infrastructure terrorism. Every agency came. Every agency left with apologies. My compliance was too tight. My documentation too airtight. Each false report turned Vivian from powerful opponent to nuisance stalker in the eyes of officials. The credibility she'd cultivated decayed before investors, neighbors, even her allies. Meanwhile, cracks widened in her empire. Contractors filed breach reports. Overtime ballooned costs. Anonymous workers whispered about her cutting safety corners to meet impossible deadlines. And worst of all for her, insurance policies excluded lake-level fluctuations. If that water dropped, her multi-million-dollar project had zero coverage. Investors would absorb the freefall themselves. It was like watching a Titanic hull breach before the iceberg even touched. By mid-May, the entire county buzzed with two competing countdowns: Vivian's luxury grand opening bash, with catering tents, live music, promotional banners, and my environmental restoration project, memorialized on state filings with official seals. Neighbors divided like armies on a border. Old-timers whispered encouragement to me at the store, while her investors huddled in manicured lawns, faces creased with worry. The air itself felt tight, as if the lake held its breath knowing the date approached. Memorial Day weekend dawned perfect. Not a cloud in the sky. Pavement hot under tires as summer crowds flooded into Thornhill. By 7:30 a.m., families pitched blankets along the lakefront, fishing lines dangling into waters destined to sink. At 8 March sharp, I stood atop the dam with my crew, Walt to my right, Eleanor clutching thermos and clipboard, Marcus Anderson in me. Official vest, Rebecca with the legal binder. Cameras from regional news outlets lined the view, and below, a sea of residents, investors, and curiosity seekers. And at their center, Vivienne, heels clacking across concrete like gunshots, her platinum hair unraveling in the morning wind, mascara already betraying sleepless nights. She pointed at me, voice cracking through a bullhorn she barely controlled. "You can't do this! This is mine! Everything I've built, gone! Do you hear me?" Deputy Santos stepped forward, calm as ever, hand hovering near her sidearm only out of duty. "Ma'am," she said, steady, "this maintenance is legally required. Any interference would be obstruction." Marcus raised his clipboard like a flag. New York State Environmental Order, documented, mandated. Her bodyguards, sensing tides of law and press, quietly peeled away. Even her allies began edging back, unwilling to drown with her. The crowd stilled. Investors clutched, their phones already calculating losses. Old-timers waited, silent but resolute. The cameras rolled. I stepped to the wheel, my hand on steel, the pressure of decades of water behind me, and then I turned it, slowly, firmly, decisively. The dam groaned awake, metal straining, spillways, opening like the throat of history itself. Water surged, roaring freedom it had held back for 70 years. The surface dropped, first inches, then feet. And with it, Vivienne's empire began its spectacular collapse.